Section 91 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 3 by Louis Ginzberg. Section 91, The Giant Og. The war with Sihon took place in the month of Elul. In the following month of Tishri they rested on account of the holy days, but immediately after these they set out to battle against Og. This king did not hasten to his brother's aid, although he was only 1 day's distance from him, for he felt sure Sihon could conquer Israel without his assistance. He erred in this, however, as in some other matters. In the war of the 4 kings against the 5, it was Og who had brought to Abraham news of his nephew Lot's bondage, assuming that Abraham would surely hasten to his kinsman's aid, be killed in battle, and thus enable Og to get possession of the beautiful Sarah. God, however, leaves no man unrewarded or unpunished. To reward him for hastening with quick steps to advise Abraham of Lot's captivity, God granted him life for 500 years, but he was eventually killed because it was only a wicked motive that had induced him to perform this service for Abraham. He did not, as he had hoped, gain Sarah, but was slain by her descendant Moses. The battle against Og took place in Edrei, the outskirts of which Israel reached toward nightfall. On the following morning, however, barely at gray dawn, Moses arose and prepared to attack the city. But looking toward the city wall, he cried in amazement, "Behold, in the night they have built up a new wall about the city." Moses did not see clearly in the misty morning, for there was no wall, but only the giant Og, who sat upon the wall with his feet touching the ground below. Considering Og's enormous stature, Moses' mistake was pardonable, for as a gravedigger of later times related, Og's thigh bone alone measured more than 3 parasangs. Once, so records Abba Saul, I hunted a stag which fled into the thigh bone of a dead man. I pursued it and ran along 3 parasangs of the thigh bone, yet had not reached its end. This thigh bone, as was later established, was Og's. This giant never in all his days made use of a wooden chair or bed, as these would have broken down beneath his weight, but sat upon iron chairs and lay upon iron beds. He was not only of gigantic build and strength, but of a breadth also that was completely out of proportion even with his height, for his breadth was 1/2 his height, whereas the normal proportion of breadth to height is as 1 to 3. In his youth Og had been a slave to Abraham, who had received him as a gift from Nimrod, for Og is none other than Eliezer, Abraham's steward. One day when Abraham rebuked him and shouted at him, Eliezer was so frightened that one of his teeth fell out, and Abraham fashioned out of it a bed in which he always slept. Og daily devoured 1,000 oxen, or an equal number of other animals, and drank correspondingly, requiring daily not less than 1,000 measures of liquids. He remained in Abraham's service until Isaac's marriage, when Abraham gave him his freedom as a reward for having undertaken the labor of wooing Rebekah for his son, and of fetching her to his house. God also rewarded him in this world, that this wicked wight might not lay claim to a reward in the world to come. He therefore made a king of him. During his reign he founded 60 cities that he surrounded with high walls, the lowest of which was not less than 60 miles in height. Moses now feared to wage war against Og, not only on account of his giant strength and huge size, which Moses had now witnessed with his own eyes, but he also thought, I am only 120 years old, whereas he is more than 500. Surely he could never have attained so great an age had he not performed meritorious deeds. Moses also remembered that Og was the only giant that had escaped the hand of Amraphel, and he perceived in this a token of God's special favor toward Og. Moses feared, moreover, that Israel in the recent war against Sihon might have committed sins, so that God would not now stand by them. The pious are always afraid of the consequences of sin, and therefore do not rely upon the assurances God had made to them. Hence Moses now feared to advance upon Og, even though God had promised him aid against his enemies. God, however, said to him, "What is thy hand?" His destruction has been decreed since the moment when he looked with evil eyes upon Jacob and his family when they arrived in Egypt. For even then God had said to him, "O thou wicked knave, why dost thou look upon them with all evil eye? Verily thine eyes shall burst, for thou shalt fall into their hands." Og met his death in the following fashion. When he discovered that Israel's camp was 3 parasangs in circumference, he said, "I shall now tear up a mountain of 3 parasangs, and cast it upon Israel's camp, and crush them." He did as he had planned, pulled up a mountain of 3 parasangs, laid it upon his head, and came marching in the direction of the Israelite camp to hurl it upon them. But what did God do? He caused ants to perforate the mountain, so that it slipped from Og's head down upon his neck, and when he attempted to shake it off, his teeth pushed out and extended to left and right, and did not let the mountain pass, so that he now stood there with the mountain, unable to throw it from him. When Moses saw this, he took an axe 12 cubits long, leaped 10 cubits into the air, and dealt a blow to Og's ankle, which caused the giant's death. This was the end of the last of the giants, who was not only last in time, but also in significance, for despite his height and strength, he was the most insignificant of the giants who perished in the flood. With Og's death, all his lands fell to the lot of the Israelites without another sword stroke, for God has so ordained it that all of Og's warriors were with him at his encounter with Israel. And after Israel had conquered these, only women and children remained in all the land. Had Israel been obliged to advance upon every city individually, they would never have finished on account of the number of the cities and the strength of the hosts of the Amorites. Not alone Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, were such giants and heroes, but all the Amorites. When Hadrian conquered Jerusalem, he boasted of his victory, whereupon Rabbi Johanan, the son of Zakkai, said to him, "Boast not of thy victory over Jerusalem, for had not God conquered it for thee, thou shouldst never have gained it." He thereupon led Hadrian to a cave where he showed him the corpses of the Amorites, each of which was 18 cubits, and said, "When we were worthy of victory, these fell into our hands, but now on account of our sins dost thou rule over us." The victory over Sihon and his hosts was as great as that over Pharaoh and his hosts, and so was the victory over Og and his hosts. Each of these victories was as important as that over the 31 kings that Joshua later captured, and it would well have behooved Israel to sing songs of praise to their Lord, as after Pharaoh's destruction. David later made good this omission, for he intoned a song of praise in gratitude for the victory God had lent to Israel over Sihon and Og. Without direct assistance from God, these victories would not have been possible, but he sent hornets upon them, and their destruction was irrevocable. 2 hornets pursued every Amorite. One bit one eye, the second the other eye, and the poison of these little creatures consumed those bitten by them. These hornets remained on the east side of the Jordan, and did not pursue Israel's march to the regions west of the Jordan. Nevertheless, they wrought great havoc among the Canaanites of the region west of the Jordan. The hornets stood on the eastern bank of the Jordan, and spat their venom across to the opposite bank, so that the Canaanites that were hit became blind and were disarmed. When God promised Moses to send an angel to Israel, he declined the offer with the words, "If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence." Whereupon God replied, "Thou complainest because I desire to send only an angel to assist thee to conquer the land. As truly as thou livest, I shall now send thee not even an angel, but a hornet to destroy the enemies of Israel. It is, however, for thy sake alone that I deliver the enemy into Israel's hands, and not as if Israel deserved it through their own good deeds." Og's bed, fashioned out of ivory, that measured 9 arms' length, taking the giant's arm as a standard, Og had preserved in the Ammonite city Rabbah, for he knew that Israel would penetrate neither to the land of the Ammonites nor of the Moabites, because God had prohibited them from coming too close to Lot's descendants. He likewise forbade them to wage war with the Edomites. In this way Esau, a son kind to his father Isaac, was rewarded by not having his descendants, the Edomites, molested by Israel. God said to Israel, "In this world ye shall have no sway over the mountain Seir, Edom's realm, but in the future world, when ye shall be released, then shall ye obtain possession of it. Until then, however, beware of the sons of Esau, even when they fear ye, much more so when ye shall dwell scattered among them." Section 90 of the Legends of the Jews, Volume 3, by Louis Ginzberg. Sihon, the king of the Amorites. The crushing of those concealed in the caves of the mountain at Arnon was only the beginning of the miracles God wrought for Israel during their conquest of the land. It was at Arnon, too, that Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and his people, who hardly a month after Aaron's death rushed upon Israel, were completely destroyed by them. This Amorite king, and likewise Og, the king of Basham, were sons of Ahiah, whose father Shemhazai was one of the fallen angels. In accordance with his celestial origin, Sihon was a giant who none could withstand, for he was of enormous stature, taller than any tower in all the world, his thigh bone alone measuring 18 cubits, according to the big cubit of that time. In spite of his huge size, he was also fleet of foot, wherefore he was called Sihon, foal, to indicate the celerity with which he moved, for his true name was Arad. Moses was sorely afraid of waging war against this giant, but God put Sihon's and Og's guardian angels in chains, and then said to Moses, "Behold, I have begun to deliver up Sihon and his land before thee. Begin to possess, that thou mayest inherit his land." For indeed, after the angels of Sihon and his people had fallen, Moses had nothing more to fear, for his enemies were thus delivered into his hands. God assured Moses that he would begin to put the dread of him and the fear of him upon the peoples that are under the whole heaven, by bidding the sun to stand still during his war against Sihon, that all the world might see that God battled for Moses. Moses now asked if he might, before waging war, send ambassadors to Sihon to request him to permit Israel to pass through the land. God replied, "How now? I commanded thee, rise up, contend with him in battle, begin to possess his land, and thou wantest to send him messengers of peace?" Moses, however, replied, "I desire only to follow thy example, when thou didst wish to lead Israel out of Egypt, and yet didst send me to Pharaoh with the message to let Israel, thy people, pass out, even though thou couldst have consumed all of Egypt with one flash of lightning. When thou didst reveal the Torah too, thou didst offer it to the heathen nations for acceptance before giving it to Israel." God saw the justice of Moses' words and commanded him never in the future to declare war upon a city before previously urging the people to surrender in peace. Moses hereupon sent a missive to Sihon, in which he requested him to permit Israel to pass through the land, promising him that he would see to it that the people should go along by the king's highway, so that he need have no cause to fear any deeds of violence upon married women or seductions of girls. "We shall even," continued Moses, "pay for the water that is otherwise given freely, and likewise buy foodstuffs from thee at good prices." This letter to Sihon contained at its close, notwithstanding the communication that the Israelites would bring war upon Sihon in case he did not permit them to pass through, Moses' assumption, however, that Sihon should permit Israel to pass through sounded in Sihon's ears like a summons to the keeper of a vineyard to permit one to harvest it. Sihon's answer, therefore, was as follows: "I and my brother Og received tribute from all the other Canaanite kings to keep off their enemies from access to the land, and now you ask me to give you free access to Canaan." War between Sihon and Moses ensued and ended in a brilliant victory for Israel. Sihon and his son, who equaled him in heroic strength, found their death in this fray. God had so brought it to pass that Israel had no need of laboriously waging war upon one city after another in Sihon's land. He had brought all the hosts of this Amorite king together into Heshbon. When this city therefore and the hosts within it were destroyed, all the rest of Sihon's land lay open before them. Israel's victory was all the more marvelous because Heshbon was an exceptionally well-fortified city, so that had gnats been its inhabitants, it could not have been captured by mortal means, much less so when manned by the hero Sihon and his heroic warriors. This victory was made possible only by the fact that God visited them with convulsions so terrible that they rolled up and writhed in pain, unable to stand in the battle lines, so that Israel could cut them down while they were half dead from convulsive pains. God also drew masks over their faces so that they could not see plainly, and taking one another for Israelites, slew their own people. With the fall of Heshbon, Israel came into possession of all the land of Sihon, with the exception of Jazer, and Moses therefore sent spies to that city. The men whom he sent there, Caleb and Phinehas, were not only capable warriors, but also pious men. They said, Moses once sent spies who brought great misfortune upon all their generations. We will attack this city, trusting in God, and we are sure we shall not perish, because Moses has prayed for our welfare. They thereupon attacked Jazer, conquered it, and when upon the day after Moses had sent them out, they returned to him, they informed him that they had conquered Jazer and slain its inhabitants.